This is going to be a phenomenal seminar. I'm absolutely thrilled and honored to have the one and only Matt Dees as our guest today. Thanks so much, Matt, for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
It's going to be great. We have so much to talk about. I have a bunch of your wine here. You have a great wine for your burgers when you're
exactly. It's
and,
Friday, I think. I think it's Friday.
I think it is Friday also. And before we just dive in, our goal is to use this time to bring us all a little bit together in this crazy discombobulated world that we're living in right now. And we would really love to make these seminars be interactive. So please give us your questions. And the sooner we have your questions, the more we can weave them into the discussion. We've had a few of these seminars, Matt, where like all the questions come in at the last 10 minutes. And I'm like, oh, it's such a great question. It needs the proper answer. So, but anyway, thanks again for your time on a Friday. I hope you and your family are staying safe in this bizarre world right now.
All things considered, we're very blessed.
Okay.
We're feeling good.
Good. And the teams at the wineries?
Everybody's great. We have a facility in Lompoc and a facility in Buellton and our 2 estate vineyards. And we've been able to stay separate, keep six feet and get our work done. Still incredibly busy. So we're going full steam ahead.
Cool. You have a very interesting path that's taken you to Santa Barbara. How did you get into the whole wine business in the first place?
Well, I grew up in the fine winemaking mecca of Kansas City, obviously.
Exactly.
The only way to go, learned everything there. I was a kid who loved plants. I was a kid who was just taken with insects. It appears to be genetic. My children appear to have it, whatever that bug gene is. And then I moved to Vermont, which is maybe the second finest fine winemaking mecca in the world. And, I went to University of Vermont to Groovy UV. And in 97, 98, I was able to plant a vineyard with a gentleman there and make ice wine and make Vidal Blanc and Seyval Blanc, Vignoles, Chambourcin, all those Bac Noir. And, just got bit by the bug then. And one day in Vermont, it was, negative 20 degrees outside. And I was digging the vines up with a pickaxe, basically, to see if they had survived. And it was snowing and miserable. And I thought, maybe there's somewhere in the world where the sun shines and, the grapes don't frost at 19 bricks. And, I moved out to Napa, made wine with the Staglin family for years, with Andy Erickson, moved to New Zealand, made wine with Doug Weiser.
That's a great story how you got that job. Didn't you just write him an email or a letter and say, hey, I'm looking for a job? And he said, yeah, come on out.
Oh, those are the old days. I went to my brother. I was a college kid. I didn't have any money. So my brother bought me a bottle of 95 Staglin family Cabernet from Sherry Lehman in the city. And I was beside myself, that beautiful bottle, Rutherford Bench, Shelachev, and I opened that bottle and I had never tasted anything like that. It wasn't quite like Vermont Bac Noir, needless to say.
Not exactly.
Which is actually, we made some killer wines in Vermont. I still blind people and they think they're also SGNs, but honestly, but the Staglin wine, I had never seen texture like that, velvet. And they put their phone number on the back and it was actually their phone number. You literally called it. It was, Sherry Staglin. And I said, look, I'm this kid from Kansas who makes wine in Vermont. Can I come work with you? And she was incredibly sweet and wonderful. And basically said, we don't have anywhere for you to work. And I basically said, well, I have a ticket to Oakland tomorrow. Could I stop by around noon? And then they became family. And they were still, to this day, some of my nearest and dearest friends.
That's
and
a family.
Got lucky. Right place, right time.
Well, anybody who knows me knows I don't believe in luck, but
you have to put yourself in the position, right?
You have to put yourself in the position. So then you went to Napa and you made wines with Andy for a few years, right?
Yeah, who's a beautiful human being and an incredibly talented guy. And sure. I showed up in 01, and then we made the 02 together, 03.
02 is a pretty famous wine.
The 02?
Yeah.
It's a killer wine.
Yeah.
Oh, Brad Grimes.
He's one of your biggest fans.
I love me some Brad Grimes, but that 02 is, boy, the stars aligned. The vineyard just was perfect, immaculate that year.
Yeah.
But, and then going to New Zealand and working with a young kid, Doug Weiser, who at the time was probably 25 and was from, had worked with Literai and Ted. And was just a ferociously talented gentleman. And between he and Andy, I learned everything I know.
Pretty
And
good
then,
teachers, right?
yeah, and then Andy called me when I left Craigie Range in '04, and he said, I found you a head winemaking job in Santa Barbara, and being kind of a country bumpkin, my response was, I don't know, is Santa Barbara nice? And he basically hung up the phone. So I've been here since '04. I'm getting old.
So then what happened?
Yeah, I showed up here and I started with Jonata. I came on for the first vintage of this, giant sand dune in the middle of Ballard Canyon. And it's kind of like landing on the moon. And now there's nowhere I'd rather be on this earth making wine than Ballard Canyon and Santa Rita Hills.
But there's a really pretty famous story about you guys hiring a famous French soil specialist, or maybe, I don't know if that's what he was, or agronomist, but somebody basically told you that Jonata was perfect soil for growing asparagus, right?
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Talk about when you start a new winery in a fairly new region, there's like having a fire lit under you is the greatest thing possible. Yeah. And we brought over a gentleman from Bordeaux, quite a fantastic, impressive human being, but honest, bluntly honest. And yeah, we said, here are 600 acres. Here's a dune buggy. Go drive around for 2 days. Let us know what to grow, where we should plant it. And basically gave us the asparagus everywhere was his response. And it's really good. I mean, we grow incredible asparagus, but thankfully we grew what I call the entire Noah's Ark, right? Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, Viognier, Grenache, Syrah, Sangiovese, Merlot, Cab Franc, Cab Sav, Petit Verdot, and Petit Syrah. These are young regions, and the rules aren't written yet. We're still doing our due diligence and learning, for sure.
Yeah, I remember the first time I went to Ballard Canyon, I took that road that passes by your place, by Roussac, by Larner.
Yeah.
And it looks like a David Hockney painting, like these dips and like this, and these wide open hillsides and ranches.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen in the world. It just takes your breath away. And
there's nothing quite
the
like
ones are good. Otherwise, it would be just.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but it's interesting, Antonio. You have tracked the progress of this young region and have a very intimate relationship, just because you always came out to learn about it, and you had such this incredibly open mind and belief in the region. So you have as good of an idea of what's happening in this region as anybody. I've always been very impressed.
Well,
When you come visit, and we hear you ask questions, I'm like, that really digs to the base of the issues out here, and it's always been something I've really admired.
Well, thanks. It's a pleasure, and I mean, it is I think, well, we'll talk about a lot of Santa Barbara because you have vineyards in a lot of Santa Barbara, different areas, but Ballard Canyon just in and of itself is just so interesting, and then all the vineyards, and I mean, obviously you make wines for other people too, like Kimsey, which is really interesting, but the Larner vineyard is really interesting. And I just think that, I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but I mean, it's just really, every time I go this year, I mean, I'm hopeful, fingers crossed, it may still be possible, but it's just captivating. And that back road that leads to Los Olivos, I mean, that's just, one of the most beautiful places in the wine world.
Yeah, you feel like, you're entering into an AVA. When you get on that road, you feel the temperature change. And it's small enough that you can see it and understand it. For me, for an AVA to exist, that helps so much to be able to see it and to be able to point from one position and say, I understand that vineyard versus this versus this versus this. And Ballard's always had that ease of understanding, and it's so crystal clear.
So for people who maybe haven't had a chance to taste these wines, do you think, or who are just sort of want to learn about Ballard Canyon, would you say that it is the temperature that's the main sort of like signature, or is it because you've got both pretty flat vineyards and you've got hillside vineyards, so it's not going to be that so much, but is it the soils, those sandy soils we talked about? Is it more temperature? Is it, I don't know, diurnal shifts? I mean, what are what, if you were teaching like a master class on Ballard Canyon, what are like the 2 or 3 things that it's like boom, boom, boom?
I think the soils are always fascinating. I'm a soil scientist by passion and by training. And I don't know that that's the picture of Ballard, because our neighbors, the Stoltmans and the Beckmans, make, world-class exquisite wines that are on limestone, clay on top of limestone. And then we're a pure sand dune, and Roussac kind of falls in between, and Larner, et cetera. To me, it's that north-south valley where you're branching off the Santa Rita Hills in essence, and you get that inland warmth, which is, I mean, it gets warm. But you also, like 1 o'clock every day, you can set your watch by it, and you'll be up there. It'll be 89 degrees, 90 degrees. The vines are starting to shut down. The stomata are starting to close. The vines are calling it quits for photosynthetic, metabolism for the day. And then the breeze comes up, and you drop 8 degrees, 10 degrees. All of a sudden, the vines continue their photosynthetic journey, and so you get that huge diurnal shift as well, which is those hot daytime temperatures and night getting so cold that you maintain freshness, acidity. It's that combination of like really bold, voluptuous fruit on that very, I would say, concentrated frame of structure and acidity.
Yeah.
And that to me is really what defines it, the temperature shifts and that cold influence from the Santa Rita Hills.
Yeah. So to sort of frame it, the western edge of Santa Barbara County is on the Pacific Ocean, basically, right? And you've got these different sort of areas. And as you move east, this is what happens. It gets warmer, as you just alluded to, right? And then
Right.
when you get to Ballard Canyon, you get into this area where you can cultivate these Bordeaux varieties and also Rhone grapes. We'll go west in a second, but now we're focusing on Jonata and Ballard Canyon. So it's that combination, I guess, right? Ultimately.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I always talk about this, but I love this fact, right? Like, when we planted the vineyard, besides the gentleman, tip my hat wherever he is, who told us to grow asparagus, a lot of people said, if you're going to grow grapes on this vineyard in Ballard Canyon on the sand, historically speaking, you should grow Syrah. And as a history buff as well, I mean, if the Romans built your terraces or the Crusaders brought your grapes back, or, the Phoenicians, we're talking history, right? If your neighbors started planting 10 years before you did, thank goodness they did, but history is a little grandiose. So, you can see this map here. I mean, Sertico.
That's the first thing I noticed. I'm like, we put up the wrong map. Oh my God.
This is Santorini. But we did them all. We tried them all because we're the first kind of generation coming through this valley and adding to the common knowledge of what works and what doesn't. And you mix that in with a climate that's rapidly changing, we got to be on our feet. We got to be on our toes. And Syrah does deserve a position. Syrah now is, the second largest planting we have. But I mean, Sauvignon Blanc ripens next to it, and Sangiovese and Semillon and Petit Syrah, Petit Verdot, Merlot. One big happy family, right?
Yeah. So one of the things this is a very big ranch. How big is the property?
The property itself of Jonata is 600 acres. We have 82, maybe 83 acres planted currently to grapes.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is just amazing about this area is that you could probably put all of Chambon Musigny in.
Absolutely. Yeah, with space to play around it. Yeah.
In Jonata, I mean the dimension, like just the avenues, the avenues on your ranch to get, like, say, from the entrance to the house are really wide. But you can just see how diverse this vineyard is just by, even if you didn't bother to look at the legend, you would just see that the colors are really varied. So you've obviously identified a lot of really unique micro parcels there.
We did. Back in 2004, we found a map from 2004 where there were actually 25 blocks in 2004. That's 54 or 55. So we've subdivided, and we've become our own dream come true and our own worst enemy all in one. We keep subdividing, and it's brilliant, but it makes for blending nightmares and headaches, but it's worth every second.
And so you were there, at the very beginning, right?
Yeah, when I came on, though, it was planted.
It was planted. Okay, got it.
Yeah, so it was planted in 2000. We've changed everything since then, but it was planted in 2000. The first harvest was 2004. We actually dropped fruit in 2003. I showed up with boots on the ground in 2004, and that was where we got rolling.
Yeah, that's where I got the numbers mixed up. Your first vintage coincided with the first harvest, but not the planting.
Correct. Yeah.
The first, exactly. Yeah. And do you know where the clonal material came from for all these different plots?
I do. Yeah. We have a quite a spectrum. We have, Syrah clones. I think we have 11 Syrah clones on the property. Some of them, most recently we went and got Laurel Glen, Cabernet Sauvignon. We got
Laurel Glen is a vineyard in Sonoma Mountain, which is a fantastic vineyard.
Fantastic. The
Yeah.
85, 86, 87. We got 2 clones from our friends up at Ridge. We got the Cuesta clone from our friends up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and we have VCC, Cabernet Franc, you name it. We have tried it. Some of them don't work, but some of them work famously, and we feel like the map that's shown on there now, we're firing on all cylinders, I think, across the blocks.
Cool. We have a question from David before I forget, because I think it's topical here. The Jonata is a historical name for this area, right?
Yeah. So naming a vineyard and naming a wine project, I would say, is a lot harder than naming a child in some odd ways.
Copyright it.
Yeah, exactly right. But we wanted to find a name that really spoke about the place specifically. And the original land grant, I think in 1842, when this was New Spain, basically was Rancho San Carlos de Jonata. And it was given to 2 brothers from Mexico. And Jonata is this really wonderful word. If you know the history of our little valley, it's English corruption of a Danish corruption of a Spanish corruption of a Puro-Semeño Native American word that means tall oak trees. And I think phonetically, I think the original pronunciation of it had like a bunch of X's in it. So I think we've maybe moved on from the original pronunciation, but it is the most historically relevant word for our piece of dirt that we could find. And it's just, this is an incredibly rich Spanish history here, and it seemed the proper way to go forward.
Yeah, for people who haven't visited Santa Barbara, I mean, one of the things that's really fascinating, I mean, you're going to laugh at me, Matt. I happened to watch Sideways the other day, and I was like, God, I really miss the area. But
right.
one of the things that is unique here is you have a lot of California is like this, but I think Santa Barbara's maybe got a little bit more of a very diverse cultural mix: Spanish roots, Latino roots, European, Danish roots, Native American roots, and then of course, more Western roots. And you see that show up in a lot of different areas. And I think it's one of the things that really, it's just there's a lot of strands to the local culture that you can observe even today. And it's interesting that it shows up even in the name of a ranch today. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely. I think that's such a phenomenal point people don't talk about very often. I mean, you have the Chumash tribe, and you have the old Spanish families, you have young families from Mexico coming. It's a microcosm that's quite fantastic. I think it's emblematic, and I think it's a big defining element to our wines. It's a great point.
Tell us about this one, El Desafío de Jonata. It's a Cabernet Sauvignon based wine, right? So you have you have a Merlot based, basically, right? There's a Merlot based wine, a Cabernet Franc based wine, and then a Cabernet Sauvignon based wine of the Bordeaux right variety.
Yeah. So basically, we started in 2004, and the question was, what grapes that we grow have a voice loud enough to demand a bottling? And Cab Franc did, Cab Sauv did, Merlot did, Petit Verdot did. The Desafío, is a Cabernet-based blend. It's not always even 75%, but the Desafío is the defiance or the challenge, and it's our tip of the hat. Again, thank you very much for telling us to grow asparagus. And, it's been with us ever since, and for the first couple of years, we wanted to always send that to our friend in France and put on a couple of little sprigs of asparagus and tie it around. But, the Cab where we are, I'm a Cab. That was my first love, I would say. I'm not going to say I'm a Cabernet person. It's not how I define myself, but I certainly loved it first. And Cab to me needs to be herbal and cooling and minty. That's part of its nature, and tannic. And the Cab down here is noticeably different.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the wines that I really like that you make a lot, we don't have today, but your pairing label, which is, are those still line priced at $25 a bottle? Because I mean, that's incredible.
$25 a bottle, never changed, and they kind of deliver that same complexity and freshness. Sure.
Yeah, so I know you'll never tell me where the Cabernet comes from, but that wine is usually very, very delicious, especially for the price.
It's all from Argentina, always. It's all from Argentina.
Jonata clone. But this wine's very elegant and delicate, and I think it's nice to taste Cabernet that tastes like Cabernet.
Yeah,
And
that's the thing. I love it.
you have
I
to
remember
balance.
the first couple of years that when I made that, I'd go to tastings and they would say, "Interesting, it doesn't taste like Napa,"
Yeah.
and it felt like kind of a punch to the stomach. And now I want to give them a hug and say, "Exactly, I love Napa, but we're 6 hours south. It shouldn't taste like Napa."
Yeah. I mean, but this is very Cabernet. I mean,
Yeah,
very varietal.
yeah.
Another wine that you guys make that I think is because the wines, the Jonata wines are mostly at a, you know, sort of middle and upper price range, but you make that wine called Todos, which means everything in Spanish. That's kind of your kitchen sink blend, I think. And that wine's a really great value too.
Yeah, I mean, the joy of that wine for me is that, you know, when we go into the market and I get to talk about what we do, it's a very concise story. And really it's everything we do under one cork. So it's every grape we grow, and it tastes like the property. It has that wild edge, but also the very kind of refined level of tannin. And it's a bunch of different grapes playing very nicely together.
Yeah. Well,
On
one of the
occasion.
things, well, yeah, one of the things I love about that wine is you always put it in the tasting somewhere in the middle. It's never like the first wine that you taste.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I think when you can put your $50 wine or whatever it is that it costs now, but when you can put your wine in that price range in the middle of these other wines, which are in a different category, and it's not like you don't perceive this sort of dip and then this, you know, and that's a wine that I think people should be looking out for as well, because it's always pretty impressive. Sangiovese, you still make some?
I'm still holding on to that 0.5 acres out there.
Okay.
Every year. I love it so much. We don't make it every year. I mean, it's
I
a
know.
temperamental grape, and when we make it, though, I adore it. You know, we will keep it.
Good. And then there's this wine, Sangre,
Ah, la sangre. You know,
which a lot of people would say is the sort of the flagship wine or the most representative wine. You may, I mean, I'm sure if you make those wines, you would never. It's hard to think that because you love them all. But what's the story with the Sangre?
you know, for me, the sangre. There are three wines to me that are the top of the production. It's Alma Desafio, so the Cabernet Franc, the Cabernet Sauvignon, and the Syrah. Syrah is nice because Syrah is easier to work with, I would say, to be brutally honest. I think Syrah on its own is just such a magnificently complete and compelling grape. Um, the Sangre has changed over time as our vineyard has evolved and matured. But it's such a joyful grape. Syrah it has enough fruit sweetness and gaminess and kind of sophistication and complexity and sensuality. It's really the perfect grape for where we are. So between that and Cab Franc, it depends on the vintage, but Syrah probably has been the most consistent, arguably. And the Sangre it was the easiest wine to name, I'll tell you that much. I think that took us about 2 minutes to come up with that name.
Blood, yeah. But one of the things about this wine is, I mean, I think all of the wines have had I'm sure it's very hard to make a wine in a first vintage from a place that has like basically no track record. And I mean, I'm sure that that's unbelievably hard. But one of the things that's definitely happened with these wines is that they've evolved towards a style of more freshness and more aromatics. And the first vintages were really super concentrated and super rich. And this wine, 15, I mean, that's the year that had that brutal heat in the middle and very dry. But the wine is very aromatic and lifted. And if you didn't know the vintage, I think it'd be very hard to say, that's 15. It's really very fresh. So tell us about the arc of evolution and the thought there at Jonata over the years.
A ton of it, I think a ton of it is just a vineyard maturation. I think we moved into a window of the vines at their apex, at their very best. I think part of it too is, look, vineyards mature, so do winemakers. I think early on we were extracting and we were extending macerations and whole cluster and let's go. And we've kind of moved to a point almost like Spinal Tap, like don't look at it, don't touch it, don't think about it, don't touch it, right? Where we'll do a fermentation and we'll pump it over once a day for 2 minutes. There's no pigeage, we're not punching down, we're not really getting in there and working it, and just keeping it fresh. I think we've learned a lot. The journey's been very humbling, and that vineyard is so reactive because of the sandy soil content that you have to listen really, really, really closely to the vines every day.
I mean, this wine has a red color. The first wines were like black.
Black.
And
yeah, open an 05 Sangre and decant it for like 4 days, you know?
And are you adding Viognier to Syrah? It's more vintage to vintage, right?
You know, on occasion we will. We tend to use, if there's any Viognier lovers out there, please turn off your connection. I actually like Viognier stems. I don't especially like the grapes. Mm-hmm. So there have been days where we will bring in Viognier with the Syrah, destem it, press the Viognier as Viognier, and then throw the stems in the ferment. Our Viognier stems are like, wine. Yeah. We make a white wine, and then we'll bring in the stems and some of the skins from Viognier, minus the juice, to make, I mean, not that we need a darker wine, but to make a more aromatically lifted wine. The stems are like green peppercorn in excelsis, like they're just heavenly.
Do you dry the stems, or are they're fresh going to the tank?
We've dried them. I prefer, we'll let them sit for a day. It's oftentimes very nice to kind of dry the stems for a day to get rid of some of the sap from the cuts, to dry the resin. Yeah. It's a great question. Over the course of the last 16 years, we've done a little bit of everything. I mean, we've done pasito, where we've really laid it out in the sun. We've pushed the boundaries, pushed the envelope a little bit, but the Viognier, we do still maybe 1 or 2% into the sangre.
The wine is showing really great.